This is the Hard Thing Podcast. Today, we are overcoming average. Welcome back to another episode of the Hard Thing Podcast. This is your host, Justin Lewis, and this is the podcast that helps you win the war on being average and mediocre in your daily life. And we do that by helping you do hard things. The goal of the show is to give you the tips, tricks, tools, tactics, whatever you need to do the hard things, the obstacles in your life, and have a better life and overcome average and step up above mediocrity. Today is our Monday show, so you're going to hear a conversation between me and a high-performing individual who has done hard things and lived to tell the tale. On Thursdays, we have our show, which is called The Forge, where myself and co-host Ty Crockett do the action items given to us by today's guest, as well as giving each other challenges and doing regularly hard things. But more about today's guest. Today, I interview Wayne McFarland, an author who recently wrote the book Tales from the Day. And what I think you'll get most from today's episode is the ability to adventure, to have a life worth living, and to have experiences. Put yourself out there, take risks. Wayne has done some pretty interesting things, as you'll hear. I mean, running with the bulls, pitching loan sharks, actually fishing for sharks, all sorts of things. And he's learned some pretty interesting lessons along the way. And, well, you know what? I'll just let him tell you. So here's my conversation with Wayne McFarland. All right. Well, we are happy to have you on the show, Wayne. We're excited to have this conversation, and I'm excited to really talk with you about your story and your book and the things that you can teach me and my audience.
Well, thanks. I've been really looking forward to this. So thank you for the invite. I am delighted to be here.
For sure. So, Wayne, like always, I want to start off asking the question that I ask all my guests. What's the hardest thing you've ever done?
I would have to say, and I guess it kind of keys into the direction of your show, but it's not the hardest thing. It'd be the hardest things. And those would be defined as doing stuff for the first time you've never done before. So you have an opportunity to pitch an advertising contract to a loan shark, or call the Salvation Army to take a bar out of your house, or stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, getting out of your comfort zone to do that kind of stuff is really hard, but it's very productive, because what it taught me more than anything else is that today's disaster is not only tomorrow's funny story, but it often turns into something totally different than you thought it would when you started out. So I suppose that's a reason to go ahead and do stuff. But then again, you can fall into a bog too, so you got to be careful.
Yeah, and that's true. And I want to ask, because, I mean, you've had lots of first starts and doing things new. How do you tell the difference between something that might end up to be really, really detrimental versus something that may just, be some yolk on your face?
Well, I think probably the answer to that is, the first thing I always tell people is give it the Sunday school test. I mean, if whatever you're doing, you'd be embarrassed to tell a group of 11-year-olds, don't do it. I mean, that's a big, clear thing. On the flip side of that, when you do new stuff, I mean, totally new stuff, there's always the chance you're going to end up sticking your foot in it. But on the other hand, there's always the chance you might win. Yeah. So it's worth as long as you apply the Sunday school test, I think it's worth taking the shot.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I think we don't teach enough about today, that, risk is inherent in almost everything we do. And the idea is to measure risk, assess risk, and mitigate risk. But sometimes you can't, and you have to take action anyways. Did you always have this mindset of, you got to make a choice, you got to step out there and see what comes?
Well, I think part of it is I grew up on a little farm in the Midwest. And man, I got to tell you, all I wanted to do was just get out of there. I mean, if you spent your time in the summer pulling mustard weeds out of the corn, and the closest town is like 15 miles away, and there's nobody to take you there, I'm telling you. So to answer your question, I was just wild to get away and to do things and to experience something other than being a pilot. which, as my grandfather said, you pilot here and you pilot there. And I thought, I want that to be my life. I got nothing against farming. My relatives are still farmers back in the Midwest, and they've done very well. I mean, they go on cruises and they send their kids to college. Very different than it used to be.
Mm.
So I'm not sure if, you ought to have music in the background, rambling, man. I can rambling.
No, go ahead.
Hope I answered your question.
No, that was perfect. And I find it very interesting, especially because right now, circumstances are different, but in a sense, all of us are kind of cooped up inside. Bless you. You're welcome. All of us are kind of cooped up inside due to this global pandemic. So a lot of people might be feeling this sense of, I've been here for a while. It's 15 miles to the next, person, metaphorically, right? You know what I mean? And I got to get out, try something else. So like, how did you decide on what you were going to try when you did get out?
Well, most of it when I started was just traveling. I went and hitchhiked around Europe and this and that. And then it came time when I could leave. And I went to where? California. And then getting back to your point about, being inside with COVID, I think that keys well into your comment about, doing stuff or not doing stuff that you get a feeling might be pretty stupid. And as much as I hate the isolation, although my dog loves it, I think, it has amazed me at how many people have ended up acting stupidly, that, or getting on the thing, beating their chest. It's my right. I shouldn't have to wear a mask. Well, you shouldn't have to in a perfect world. But then again, if you don't wear a mask, you shouldn't have to go to the hospital and have a tube shoved down your throat either. So it has been truly amazing to me, the stupidity of the politicization of maneuvers to protect your health. So doing things where you're taking a risk, an unacceptable risk. Now I'm speaking as the guy who ran with the bulls here, right?
Yeah.
But doing that kind of thing, knowing what kind of a risk you're running to your health and your family and everything else, that's stupidity. That's like what you were talking about. Mm. And pretty much comes under the heading of not taking care of your own people. And that to me is of paramount importance.
Wow. Yeah. You mentioned, you brought up running with the bulls. I can't just let that, I can't let that go by the wayside. Tell us about that. That's really interesting.
Well, it was back in the day before Running with the Bulls in Pamplona was covered by ESPN. I mean, now there's like, I don't know, 2 million people that show up.
Yeah.
And years ago when I went, we just got on a train. I mean, there were no reservations to get or anything. But I will tell you, in the spirit of being candid here, that I never would have run with the Bulls if I hadn't stepped on the head of a guy sleeping in a campground, which is how this stuff starts, right?
Yeah.
So I stepped on this guy's head. The ticket, the key to Pamplona, even now, it's a 7-day fiesta, and 6 days people run with the Bulls. Mm-hmm. So the fiesta kind of unspoken rules are drink all night, sleep all day, and after you drunk all night, you get up and run with the Bulls. Mm-hmm. I was good with all of it except the run with the Bulls part. So this guy turned out to be a Norwegian paratrooper.
Oh my!
I mean,
gosh.
I could have stepped on the head of a 60-year-old drunk.
Yeah.
But no, I had to pick this guy, right? So I had a vague interest in not getting hit. Mm-hmm. So he pulled out a wineskin and said, "Okay, we're going to drink this skin. We're going to go run with the Bulls, right?" Well, what can you say? And I said, "Sure. What a great idea. I've always wanted to do that." Mm-hmm. So we went off to the bull run, and this guy was one of these macho, eat raw liver kind of guys.
Right.
And I didn't know anything about this, right? And I hadn't even read Hemingway's book yet, that tome that's gotten more people gored than probably any other book ever written. And so they start the run with a big rocket. And we started running down the street. And then I noticed we were running in the wrong direction, toward the bulls and not away from them. Right? So it turns out that the really macho, big, brave people, when the bull run starts, they run toward the bulls. And then as soon as you can see them, you run away.
Oh, wow.
Well, I had no problem with running away either, but the streets were packed with people. I can't describe it to you, but now, and the screaming and the noise is amazing. But probably the biggest thing I noticed was the run is like it's a street you run down. It's got its curves and whatever.
Right.
And the side streets where you can get the hell off the bull run were all fenced. And I thought, well, that's no big deal. You can just hit the fence and jump over the top. So I was going to do that. And then I noticed that people who were doing it were falling back in the street. And that's because Spanish guys on the other side of the fence were hitting people in the face, shouting in Spanish, "You wanted to run? Run." They don't do that anymore. Now there's two fences. The first one behind which are, I'm told this, I haven't been there, but which are medical people and ambulances and whatever. Didn't used to be like that.
Wow.
And the other part of it is, as you get to the end of the run is the bull ring. And there's a tunnel you run through to get into the bull ring, or at least in those days. And it's a concrete tunnel. And I figured if you got caught in there, it'd be really bad because a bull could get you up to the side of the wall and gore you. As it turns out, the big problem is people would pile up and suffocate. I mean, it was just one delightful thing after another, right?
Wow.
Yeah, they get in a big crowd rush. So, and then you get in the ring and it's packed with 20,000 people all screaming at the idiots down below. So I finally was over and I got back to campground. My friend that I was there with was all beat up. And I said, "What happened to you? Did you run with the bulls?" He said, "No. What do I look like? I'm an idiot." Well, I was a little hard pressed.
Kind of right now.
Yeah. And I said, "Well, what happened to you?" And he said, "Well, I was standing on the street and I met this young lady who invited me up to her apartment balcony to look at all the crazy people running in the street." And he said everything was going great until two guys burst in shouting things in Spanish, mostly with the word hermanos, which is brothers. and he then told me they threw him down the stairs. And I said, and I was kind of looking at him, I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, it could have been worse." And I said, "How could it be worse?" And he said, "Well, they were going to throw me over the balcony." So that was running with the bulls years ago. Very different now.
Yeah.
Very civilized.
What took you over there to be over there in the first place?
Getting away from the farm, and they had instituted the first really cheap plane flights to Europe. And I said, man, I'm there. I had just enough money to buy drinks on the plane, and that was it. And when you get to Europe, there are a lot of cheap places to stay. So the only reason I came back from there, I was doing some writing over there and had just gotten an assignment to go to Egypt to cover the flooding of the Aswan Dam, flooding the Valley of the Kings, which I really wanted to do. Yeah. And then I got a letter from Uncle Sam saying, "Wayne, we can't possibly win the Vietnam War without you. It's an impossibility. Yeah. Come home, dear son." So I went back and ended up in the Air Force and blah, blah. But at the time, we were seeing turmoil now, but at the time, there was real turmoil. I mean, I had friends who went to jail. I had friends who, went to Canada. I had a couple friends who had somebody break their knees. Wow. So they wouldn't have to go in. Yeah, it wasn't cowardice. They just didn't believe in it. And I witnessed one riot in Cambridge where the anti-protesters, now we view them as right-wingers, I guess, were carrying signs that had the peace symbol on them. And underneath it said, "Footprint of the American Chicken." So, yeah. Wow. So what's going on and you and I agreed no politics, but going on today is terrible. But we've seen terrible times before, and we'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have to say thank you for your service. Uh, I have a deep respect for everyone who's served, and a very high admiration. Um, I wanted to ask, you have been many places. You hitchhiked around Europe. How, I mean, a lot of people could not see themselves doing that today. How did you keep yourself safe? How did you keep yourself aware of what was going on? You know what I mean?
Well, and being young and stupid helps. I I have to tell you honestly, there is a part of the world that it's part of the tradition where a lot of folks, dare I say it, your age-ish and younger, do that stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's tons of people hitching and traveling and staying in youth dormitories and doing all kinds of stuff. I never really thought about it, to tell you the truth. And it just, maybe because you have an image that hopefully you lose sometime in your life. I'm invulnerable.
Yeah.
Shoot me, the bullets will bounce off. It's great. It never occurred to me, probably other than in the midst of the bull run, that it could be dangerous.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow.
So I didn't go to any lengths to keep myself safe. I thought I was safe being, young and stupid, as I say.
Yeah. I can see that particular belief being valuable in one way. I mean, I don't see half as many people being adventurous, excuse me, being adventurous, putting themselves out there, taking risk like we were talking about. And so, I mean, you see a lot of more people complaining about having a very unfulfilling life or feeling lost, or you know what I mean? Like they're not willing to try that. And so I think that might be useful in one way. Go ahead.
I saw the saddest interview the other day, which I don't know, audience might be interested in. It was a group of academic researchers who decided they were going to capture the wisdom of people who had journeyed down life's path, that were older. So they interviewed, I don't know, a ton of people, a few hundred who were over the age of 70. And they found a 100% consistency that when they asked people, no one talked about what they regretted doing, but everybody talked about what they regretted not doing. So there's I think a lesson. And you're right, a lot of people get a chance to do something really strange and it's just, well, I've never done that and I don't know how to do that, and they just don't do it, and later look back on it and wish they'd given it a shot. I just didn't want to end up, I guess, when stuff came rolling my way, to look back on it one day and say, I wish I'd run with the bulls. I wish I'd pitched the lone shark. I wish I'd roped the bear,
Yeah.
And so I just do stuff. I found it fun, kind of, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the weird quirk.
Yeah.
That kind of quirk can get you killed, though.
It can, but
Yeah.
it's also the kind of quirk that can make you feel alive. And
Well,
actually,
that's
exactly. I want to talk about those experiences you mentioned. I'd actually written them down based on the chapters in your book that I saw, and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. But if someone came to you, someone younger, maybe someone in my age, and asked, like, how do you live without regrets? Like, how do you get started? What would you tell them?
I would tell them that if they've always, the first thing is, think about what you've always wanted to do. You look at people making a fortune in Bitcoin, or you've always wanted to start a business or go online. My first advice is give it a shot. And the less far you are along on your path, the less you've got to lose, because you're probably going to lose. The odds are. So the first thing I tell people is, look, whatever you've always wanted to do, give it a shot. Even if you fall on your face, At least then you'll know, well, that was spectacular. That was a crash. It was spectacular.
Yeah.
The other thing is that if you get out there and let me give you an example. 5 years ago, if somebody pulled up to you on at the curb and said, "Hey, what are you going to be doing in 5 years?" You would not have guessed this. I'm willing to bet you.
No.
Yeah. See, that's how it works. And you had a shot to do this, or you've always wanted to do it, or be in broadcasting, and you did it. Here you are.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to be internationally syndicated. You might be. Who knows what's going to happen with this gig? But if you weren't doing it, you wouldn't have a shot. You wouldn't have a chance to build it into something bigger, and maybe be on the Howard Stern show. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's possible.
I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
One thing that you said, you got to try things because you might fall on your face, but you might not. One thing that came to mind when you said you might fall on your face is the fact that very rarely when you fall on your face, do you fall on your face right where you're standing. It's always in one direction, one way or the other. So even if you fall on your face, you've made some progress somewhere.
Well, it's true. And like we were talking before your show went live, what looks at the time like a hideous failure may not be such. Mm-hmm. Case in point is the day we lost 10 grand at the Hollywood sign. So what happened with that was when I was first in California, how broke was I? I was about a week away from living in my car broke. I was broke, right? And at the time we were getting by doing commercials basically for manufacturers. So if you're selling tar shingles, call your Uncle Wayne and I'd do an audio track and we'd take pictures of those beautiful shingles, mm-hmm. and then their salespeople could take them out and show customers, right? Mm-hmm. So during one of these presentations I think it was a shingle maker, actually, we used a laser when they first kind of came out. So my phone rings one day and this guy says, "Are you the one with the laser?" I didn't have any lasers. I rented them. But what did I say? I said, "Yes, that's me." And the guy says, "I swear to you," he says, "we have a contract to provide searchlights for the reopening, the refurbishing of the Hollywood sign. And we were thinking, what could be better than to have lasers?" And I said, "Nothing I can think of." So I took the job on, and we were going to get paid after it was over. Didn't have any lasers, so this was going to go live on TV, on CBS, to a third of the country, live. And I'm thinking, I'm going to have a chair with my name on it. It's going to be a food truck. There'll be overhead booms. I'll be able to shout, "Cut," things like that.
Yeah.
So I went to the laser company, and they were like, I don't know, 30 grand a shot. And I promised them a screen credit with CBS, which I had no right to do. And they lent me a couple lasers, and they were reluctant because the lasers at the time had a tube in them, a glass tube, mm-hmm. that if it got too hot or too cold, it would blow up, and they were $5 grand a whack.
Wow. So
the day of the presentation comes, and it never sleets in Southern California, but it sleeted that day. We're up on top of the mountain under the Hollywood sign.
Wow.
And we're sitting, and my wife and I were newly married, right? We're sitting under that giant H on the Hollywood sign. I later found out that's where an actress by the name of Peg Entwistle had jumped to her death after she missed a movie role. Should have been a warning. Yeah. So anyway, our time is coming, and there's a live show down below, and there was a lady in the show, Lola, her name was, who I never met her. I never really knew her. But this woman was fantastic. She had her own song, What Lola Wants, Lola Gets. But the best thing is she won a part of the New York Mets in a Baccarat game and later sold it for 14 million big ones. And yeah, exactly. who could not love a woman like that? I was in love with her. I never met her. Right? So our time came to fire up our lasers, the giant finale. And now the orchestra goes live. The Hollywood sign. And I fired up the first laser, and that sucker had water in it, and it blew up instantly. And my wife and I were running around holding umbrellas over the second laser, and we fired it up. We got about one beam out of it, and that one blew up.
No.
So my new wife and I are sitting looking at the lights of Hollywood and Santa Monica. And I said, well, we just tanked in front of 20 million people, but we get paid tomorrow. So the next day rolls around, and I figured that I'd awakened to a mob, outside with torches and pitchforks. But,
right.
So I called the company and I said, hey, I want to come down and get our check. We did our thing last night. And a guy on the other end of the phone starts laughing. He said, well, good luck with that. They just declared bankruptcy. So I'm sitting at my desk in my 2-room office, holding my head. I don't know if I was weeping, probably. And I had no way to pay the money back. I don't even remember how we did it, to tell you the truth. But Gloria, my wife, comes in and said, you have got to see this. And she gives me a copy of our review in the Los Angeles Times, second largest newspaper in the nation. And they were raving about us. The spectacular laser show lit up the Hollywood sky, blah, blah. And we didn't do anything. And as it turns out, when the sleet started, all the reporters went into a trailer where there was an open bar, and they all got drunk. So when the finale came, and our now bankrupt employer turned on their searchlights, they thought it was lasers. And even had a picture in the LA Times of our work. Kevin, it was the best review I ever got, and we got a ton of business out of it.
Wow.
It was an utter failure.
That's
so it's a long-winded answer to you, is that when you go for something, you may fall forward flat on your face, but it may just not be the disaster you think it is. It may be worse, but it could be something totally different than you anticipated.
Yeah.
So what I advise your people is that even if you go for it and you fail, do it with some grace under pressure, and you learn from everything, even your failures. Probably learn more from your failures than,
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you've never had a podcast problem or anything. So,
Oh, I've had so many. I mean, towards the beginning, I used to forget to hit record. So we'd be halfway through the conversation and I'd have to be like, okay, can we start over? I've had many times where the computer just dies on me mid-conversation. Internet's always a problem. So yeah, there's definitely all sorts of problems. And actually, your story kind of made me realize that, like, I think we as human beings kind of overestimate our ability to tell the difference between good situations, bad situations, and really understand if the situation is beneficial or not. There's an old like Chinese proverb where a Chinese farmer, has a son, and he has horses and everything, and he loses a horse, right? And his neighbor's like, "Oh, you lost a horse. That's so unfortunate." And he's like, "Yeah, maybe." And then he finds the horse the next day, and he's like, "Oh, you found the horse. That's really fortunate." And the farmer's like, "Yeah, maybe." And the horse ends up breaking his kid's leg. And his neighbor's like, "Oh, your horse broke your kid's leg. That's fortunate, or that's unfortunate." And the farmer's like, "Maybe." And then an army comes to town and tries to conscript the young man, but his leg's broken, so he can't go. And so the neighbor's like, "Hey, that's fortunate. Your son's leg is broken." And he's like, "Yeah, maybe." And it's just it's a good lesson that we don't really know what's going on. Like, as smart as we think we are, we can't tell the difference between like good and bad sometimes, just based on how a situation is,
No.
So
there's a great story out of 16th century.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say there's a great story out of 16th century Japan, as long as we're being Oriental here.
Yeah.
So the shogun captures a guy he's really mad at for some reason. So he's going to sentence him to immediate death. And a guy who is in front of the throne says, "Don't kill me. I can teach your horse to sing." And the shogun says, "What?" He says, "Yeah, give me 1 year to sing." And so the Shogun said, okay, all right. And they led the guy away. And the guard said, what are you, out of your mind? You can't teach a horse to sing. And the guy said, hey, in a year, I could be dead, or the Shogun could be dead. And in a year, I might teach the horse to sing. You don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very wise, because honestly, good or bad can come from every situation. So I guess we just wait and see and look for the good stuff. So I wanted to ask about those other opportunities you've had in your life. I wanted to start first with pitching to the loan shark. Tell me about that.
Oh, the pitch to the loan shark.
Mm-hmm.
That was one where there could have been a lot of all places. And that's when there was still a lot of the mob running around. So I had a friend of mine, I was doing some broadcast work. And my friend was a pretty weird duck, actually. But he called me one day. He said, hey, I just bought a little radio station in Las Vegas. And he said, I've got a plan to make us rich. We'll live like kings. And you're going to have. He said, we won't for advertising. We'll just take swag. So if a car dealer wants to advertise, we'll take a car and we'll sell the swag. We'll live like kings and we'll be rich.
Oh, dear.
And I thought, and then he offered me some good pay to go in. So he called me in his office and he said, well, we're out of money. And I thought, oh, big shock there. I mean, we were having a great time in Las Vegas. But, and he said, we're going to go pitch Big Jim at Big Jim's Loan Sharks for a year advertising contract, all cash in advance. And I said, I don't know if that's the best idea.
Yeah.
Big Jim was the most notorious loan shark at the time in Las Vegas. And Kevin, that's saying something, right? And he had Jim's bail bonds, and his son was his vice president. His son was reputedly mean as a snake. So my friend says, look, it'll be fine. I've even made a commercial for him. So he plays me this commercial, and it was pretty good. Had a stentorian disc jockey voice and music in the background, and it would exhort listeners that if they ran afoul of the law, call him at Big Jim's bail bonds because he'd get them out of the slammer. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, yeah, that's all right. So we go to Big Jim's. And we go in the conference room, and here's Big Jim looking like Jabba the Hutt. And his son, who was a bad imitation of a gangster with the slick back hair and all this stuff. And his son starts off, and he says, I don't even know why we're here. We're not going to buy any stupid advertising. And my friend says, but I made you a commercial. And the son says, we don't want to hear any stupid commercial. Big Jim holds up his hand and says, play it. So my friend pushes the button, and instead of the commercial he played for me, out comes my friend's voice backed by minor organ music in a minor key, Bach, I think it was, and the dialogue went like this. Have you killed your wife? If you have money in the bank, here at Big Jim's bail bonds, we don't care. Have you hit your mom with an axe? If you have equity in real estate, here at Big Jim bail bonds, we don't care. And the son jumped out of his chair. I thought, we're dead now. And suddenly he noticed that Big Jim was laughing so hard, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And he looked at us and he said, that was one of the stupidest things I've ever seen done. That was really stupid, but it was great. And he said, okay, I'll give you your deal. An advertising contract, cashed in advance on 2 conditions. My friend who's reaching for his pen, said, what are the conditions? And Big Jim says, first, you never put anything on the air with me. Second, you give me a copy of that commercial, and it better be the only copy, which my friend gave it to him. And I thought that Big Jim had gotten that commercial to destroy it. But I heard a couple years later that he played it at every party he went to, right up until he went to jail.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Like, what made you guys think that, like, what made you go through with that? Because that, to me, is just like, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Well, it depends on who you hang out with. I mean, I had no idea my friend had swapped the commercials out. He thought it'd be funny. I thought, I think this is funny,
Oh, yeah,
but fortunately for us, Jim thought it was funny.
that's
But yeah, it depends on who you hang around with. I don't know if you have any crazy friends. I suspect probably so.
yeah. I think
Um,
I have one or two.
so it depends on who you hang around with. Yeah,
Wow.
there you go. And when they come up with an idea, how often do you say no? I I didn't. I said, okay.
Yeah.
It's the middle of the day. He probably won't shoot us in the front office. I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah. That's funny. Um, Now that's a whole different animal than the one that you were dealing with when you roped that bear, right?
Very different. And the uh, the key to that. Okay, I'm going to embarrass myself here. You ready?
Perfect.
Here comes a shameless plug for my book, where all these stories are, Tales from the Day, available on Amazon at this very moment. And it's the answer for all your shopping needs during the year. Buy 50 copies and just give them up. It's a matter of boredom. For reasons that I absolutely cannot understand, I decided that fighting forest fires in Idaho would be a great idea. And so I went out there and I was punished for my folly by getting a job. And we were out in a line camp out in the bushes. You talk about boredom on a farm. It's got nothing to compare with being bored in the forest. I mean, so I had gotten a lesson in shooting craps in the bunkhouse. And so I lost all my money plus a future paycheck. And another friend of mine out there, who pretty weird guy, one day came to me and said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bored are you? And I said, and I should mention that this guy was called the Golden Grub, sleeping with the only woman within 50 miles of our camp.
Yeah.
So I should have been warned that this guy was a little. So he told me that there were black bears that raided the camp dump every night. And there was only 2 trails. And if we put a lasso around one, we could probably catch a bear. You want to do it? I said, that sounds like a great idea. So he got a railroad tie from someplace, and I stole a bunch of rope off the fire helicopter, and we put a lasso over the trail. And when the bears came down, we jumped up shouting, and we caught one.
Wow.
There were actually 4 of them, and then 3 of them ran away. And we caught one right around his head and around his front leg. Well, now we had a bear. So now what do you do, right? So the bear was frightened in it, the tallest tree it could find. And it was howling. You've never heard a sound like that in your life. That sound a bear can make when it's afraid and at the top of a tree. So my friend and I thought, before the situation gets any further out of hand, we need to get the bear out of the tree. Mm-hmm. So my friend jumps up and grabs the railroad tie, which this little bear had pulled way off the ground.
Wow. And
I grabbed the rope and we pulled down. And it was like pulling the chain on an outdoor toilet, because the bear immediately crapped all over us. And by this time, all of our bunkmates and the ranger with a gun had shown up laughing, to tears, because there we are covered in bear poo, right?
Yeah.
And the ranger looked at us and looked at the bear and looked at us and said, I'm just trying to decide which of you to shoot. And to get the bear out of the tree, they had to cut it down.
Oh.
And it was a lot of pine needles and stuff, so the bear was okay when it got down. But the kicker for the story is, and there actually is a kicker. When I was walking back to the bunkhouse that night, knowing that the ranger would give us every rotten job there was for the rest of the summer, here was the ranger sitting on the banks of a river that ran right past our camp. And being, again, dumber than I should have been, I went up to him and I said, "You mind if I ask you a question?" And he said, "Nah, go ahead." And he had his gun laying beside him. And I said, isn't that just a little 22? He said, "Were you really going to shoot the bear with that? How can you shoot a bear with a little 22 gun, you know?"
Mm-hmm.
And without looking at me, he just looked out the river and he said, "I used to have a lot of guns, but I threw them all in the river right there." And what do you say to that? I mean, I didn't know what to say. So it's getting dark and I sat down on the riverbank and he just kept talking. He said, my wife was so much younger than me and everybody said it wouldn't work. And he said, one day I came home and I caught her with a younger guy who I liked, a friend of mine. And he said, by the time I got my gun out and loaded, they were gone. And he said, I never saw them again. And he said, I never wanted to do anything more in my life than kill them both. So he said that in the river. And by then it was dark and I went back to my bunkhouse and he went back to the ranger's cabin and we never spoke of it again. So there are times, I guess, when you got to know yourself well enough that yourself from getting in a lot more trouble. I'll never forget it. It was just an amazing end to the bear story,
Yeah. Wow. That's very poignant. And it's true. You do have to know yourself and you have to know your limits and you have to be humble enough to accept them and deal with them as reality.
Yep.
Rather than pretending that they're not there, because that can get you in a whole lot more trouble. The last story I wanted to hear was you went shark fishing, right?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, I had gone to Trinidad because I met a guy in college who was a native of Trinidad, and he was an Olympic runner, actually. He didn't medal, but he was fast. So anyway, we went to Trinidad, and it was a lot like Pamplona. It was a lot woollier and rougher then,
Yeah.
The cruise ships to this day let the passengers off. They can kind of sail right up to the edge of Port of Spain, which is the passengers right out onto the docks. And at the time, my friend who grew up in the island, he had friends who had steel drum bands, steel drums,
Mm-hmm.
and they would converge on the dock, the steel drum bands, and they would fleece the tourists. So that my friend pointed it out to me and said, "Now watch this." And he pointed out what was going on. So they'd play the steel drums and the tourists would take pictures. And then the local prostitutes who were in it with the band would circulate through the crowd and pick their pockets. So the spirit was, and how I got involved with the shark fishing is we had gone to the back of the island to help my friend's grandmother clean up her house, kind of an old palatial colonial mansion where she was now living there all alone.
Wow.
And you talk about poignant, it used to be the glittering home of kind of the local glitterati, the big parties and all that.
Yeah.
But her house had been taken over by these big spiders, jungle spiders. So we went there and cleaned them out. And afterwards, we went to this little local bar where all the workers would go. Had a dirt floor and one refrigerator. And so I'm standing there and I stood out like a pig in britches. I mean, to say that I crowd. It's an understatement. And this guy comes up to me and he starts talking to me in patois, which is kind of a mixture of French and English slang.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't understand a word of it. And he's getting madder and madder. And all of a sudden he pulls out a knife. And I'm thinking, oh, great. I haven't been in a fight since I'm 12 years old and I'm in a beer bar in Trinidad and this guy's pulled a knife. And about the time I was looking for a window to jump out of, my friend comes back with his uncle, and they knew this guy, and they talked him out of carving me up, and then looked at me and said, "You need to relax. So we're going to take you shark fishing. You want to go?"
Yeah.
Sure. I said, "Yeah, sure." So he was like, better than staying here and getting in some kind of a brawl.
Right.
So that night in the dark, we walked down to the ocean, and my friend's uncle, who was with us, had fishing lines that were about as big around as your finger.
Wow.
And he baited them with big hunks of raw meat. And again, I think closest thing I've gotten to a big fish is a crappie in a freshwater lake in South Dakota.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay. And the uncle says, "Okay, now take your shoes off. You don't want to walk back in wet clothes with salt on them because it's really uncomfortable." So we're standing out in the bay. We threw our lines out there, and it suddenly occurred to me, wait a minute. We're fishing for shark, and we're just wearing our underwear. There's something so wrong with this picture,
Yeah.
And about the time I'm thinking we must look really tasty standing here. And I noticed that the person with the whitest skin complexion was me, right? So it's probably like a human bobber.
Yeah.
And suddenly the uncle, who also was fishing, something hit his line really big and started dragging him out in the ocean. And so we all, and he'd hooked this huge eel, must have been 6 feet, 8 feet long.
Wow.
I think it was a moray eel, spotted. Yeah. And so the uncle beat it to death with a rock, and we decided that was enough fishing for the night.
Yeah.
So we went back to their house, and they invited me in for dinner and laid the eel on the dining table, put a nail through its head, pulled its skin off, and we fried that sucker up and ate it.
Wow.
And did not taste like chicken. I'm telling you. So that was our experience shark fishing in our underwear.
Wow.
The moral of this story for your audience, away from home, don't do something incredibly stupid just because you're not in your own backyard.
Mm-hmm.
If you wouldn't fish for sharks in your underwear where you live, then don't go to a foreign country and do it, because it's just as stupid there as it would be in your own location.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you so much, Wayne, for being on the show. I've really enjoyed hearing your stories and getting to know you. Let me ask you the last couple questions before we go.
Tales from the Day.
Tales from the Day.
Tales from the Day, my book.
Perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that how you want people to reach out to you and get to know what you're up to?
Actually, my website is www.waynemcfarland.com.
Okay.
And there's multiple pictures of me on the site, which is worth going there just for that.
Awesome. I will get that in the show notes. And then the last question. So here are the action items I came up with based on what we were talking about. And if you want to add any, feel free. The first one was to do something you'd regret not doing. And then number 2 was to think about what you've always wanted to do, like you said. And number 3 was get to know your limits. Did you have any more you wanted to add?
No, I think the only other one to put on the list is not doing that if you were home you wouldn't do because it was really stupid.
Yeah.
That's probably something that to go on the list.
Excellent.
But otherwise, yeah, I think you nailed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wayne, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And I know my audience is going to enjoy these stories. So thanks again. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning into another episode. I know that if you do those action items, you will see visible difference in your life, how you respond to it, and you'll be happy because you won't regret as many things, obviously. So thank you again for listening to the show. If you want to support the show, there are a couple things you can do. First thing, subscribe so you never miss a single episode. Again, we have episodes on Mondays and Thursdays. And if you feel so inclined to do, go ahead and share this with someone you know. Maybe you can think of someone who feels lost or stuck in their life and they need a little bit of adventure. Share this episode with them, and I know that they will get something out of it. Next, you can join the Forge. Now, the Forge is also the name of our podcast on Thursdays, but it's also the name of a free community we created to help you band with like-minded individuals, to give you a support system to help you do hard things, help you accomplish hard things. It's a place where you can feel belonging, but also get challenged. So every week we're going to give you exclusive challenges at the Forge. And every week you're going to get exclusive access to live streamed podcast episodes, both Thursday episodes and Monday episodes, well before they're released live, just because you're a member of the Forge. Last but not least, you will get access to merchandise discounts at the Hard Thing Podcast store, which is thehardthingpodcast.com/shop. And you get all that by joining the Forge, which again is free. So go to theforge.mn.co, join up today, find your community, find your group, your tribe, get pushed to do more than you thought was possible, all by joining the Forge. Now, the world is a big and scary place. And a lot of people in the world do not have good intentions. Unfortunately, there are a large number of children who have suffered as victims of these nefarious intentions. I'm talking about sex trafficking. It's a pandemic, bigger than the global pandemic, you could say, because it's been going on for years and years and years and years and years, and almost no one talks about it. Well, guess what? I'm talking about it, and I want you to do something about it. So I want to tell you about Operation Underground Railroad. They're a nonprofit organization. They go undercover to rescue kids who are stuck in the clutches of sex trafficking. And we, as the Hard Thing Podcast, have started a campaign to raise $1,000 for them. So if you want to help us raise $1,000, donate some money at gofundme.com/overcoming-average. Donate even just $1. Help us hit this goal. Give some money to OUR so they can go rescue some kids. It's a big job. They need lots of help doing it. And you can make a difference. So go and make a difference today. Thanks again, guys, for listening to the show. I really appreciate it. I know that these episodes aren't perfect. I know that, you probably go through a lot just to try and listen to one of them. But I really appreciate it. And I really want to help you guys do hard things and overcome average. So last, I'm just going to let you guys go off with this. Keep doing hard things, my friends, because you will overcome average.